Hi, Edgemont families. We're so glad that you're able to join us tonight for this our second annual virtual annual junior college night. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Fuentes, one of the counselors who works with students in grades 10 through 12. Also working with students in grades 10 through 12 is Jamie Bruckman. Wave, Jamie. And Kevin, did you just wave, Erica? You can't wave. And Kevin Fleck. And we're glad to have tonight with us Assistant Principal Mary Rose Joseph and Principal Kyle Hosier. We have two members of the PTSA who will speak to you in just a minute, and our tonight, because you get access to all of us all the time and are probably a little bit sick of our voices, or, you know, it's wonderful to have some experts in college admissions, the people who read the applications for Edgemont students, to be able to be here firsthand to tell you about the ins and outs of the, you know, what to expect in the coming years with the college process. So we're really delighted to have, in the order that they will be speaking, Brian Gomez from University of Vermont. We then have Sherry Vernon from University of Chicago. We will be followed by Erica Padilla from University of Rochester. And we will end up with, last but certainly not least, Melissa Falk from Muhlenberg College. So we're really delighted to have this group tonight. And thank you for making the time to join us. We hope that we have students and parents and guardians. We know that this can be both, this is kind of the official kickoff to your college process or planning for life after high school. Everyone may take a slightly different path, and I love the idea. I always want to start with the idea that this is a very individual process for everyone. And while this is a time in life where many students really want to be doing what, you know, their friends and peers are doing, I really encourage you to go through this with an eye on what's authentic to you, because that's going to lead to the most, you know, wonderful connections with schools and future peers and mentors and that kind of thing. So we know this process can be really exciting and also comes with a little bit of overwhelming or daunting at times. We want you to know that we, myself, Mr. Fleck, Ms. Bruckman, are all here to support you, both the students and the families, as we go through this. We have families who this may be their third or fourth generation going to college in the US, and we have many families who this is the first time they're going to have a student going to college in the US or at all, and we are prepared to work with everybody. I sometimes say the families who may have a little bit less information may be a little bit better off, because sometimes the information from when I went through the process or someone before me, that it's so different that it's hard to kind of make sense of what's going on now. So I think we should all start from a clean slate. Even if you had an older child already go through the process, we're now going through it through the lens of a different human. So it is a different process. So I always like to point out that we don't want to lose sight of high school being an experience in and of itself. It's not just like today we're preparing for that next step, but we want to encourage our students to be present for their junior year and for their senior year, and not just see this as the rat race to a different end goal. There's just so much exciting things, not just in the classroom, but extracurricularly, and there's so many cool Edgemont traditions, and just, you know, we really want you to have the balance. We know you're going to work hard, but we want you to be healthy and get some sleep. We know you're not going to get ideal amount of sleep, but slightly more sleep than none would be, you know, helpful. So I also will say that every college serves some population well, so we really appreciate not using any negative language about any school or university or institution, because you just don't know what someone else's experience is, and it may be their dream school, and it may, you know, it's just, we want to take care of each other in this process. So I really appreciate having, you know, if you really not kind of sharing negative information, particularly if you don't have firsthand, experience. Things that you can expect from Edgemont. I want to get you to our panelists for sure. Things that you can expect from Edgemont in the coming year. For your reference, at any time, day or night, weekends, we have a plethora of information on the EHS website, on the counseling department tab of the EHS website. There's a ton of stuff about starting your research, doing, apply different parts of the application. And so we definitely encourage you to look through that. You don't have to read it all in one go, but as things come up. After the winter holidays, we're going to reach out to juniors to explain the process for setting up individual post-secondary planning meetings. We are going to ask them to fill out something for us that helps us to write council recommendations. So that's kind of like the carrot to get the post-secondary planning meeting. So the counselor, your student's counselor will meet with each student and parent or guardian to discuss specifically your process, one-on-one. That doesn't mean that we can't meet at other times. That's kind of the formal planning meeting, but we are as available to students and families as you reach out to us. We will also host a financial aid night late in the spring, and just before summer, we'll host a college essay writing workshop. So there's a lot of fun to look forward to in that regard. We have two PTSA members here right now to talk to you about a program they host, and I won't even hog that. I will just introduce them and allow them to speak to you about it.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Kirsch. My son, Ben, is a junior, and along with Hillary Plattis, who's the mom of Hudson and Noah, and Sharon Ho, who's the mom of Evan, we're organizing student-to-student college night this year. So we're just going to talk a little bit about what that night is and hope that the juniors will all save the date. So student-to-student college night is exactly that. We ask the Edgemont graduates from last year, so the seniors from the class of 2021 who are freshmen in college now, to come back to Edgemont for one night only, to talk to the juniors about what their life in college is like, and to talk a little bit about their school and just college in general. And each junior who participates in the night will get to hear briefly from 3 or 4 of these college freshmen about their year. And it's a great way for the juniors to hear about college from something different than an information session or a scripted tour. There are no adults in the room for this night. We set it up and then we kind of just leave. And so it's just for the juniors. They can ask whatever questions they may have. And like Ms. Fuentes said, a lot of the focus is like getting in and applying. And sometimes kids don't really think about what it's going to be like once they actually get there and what the day-to-day life of college actually involves. And it's so different than high school. So this gives them a chance to hear from kids who had the same high school experience that they had about what it's like to transition to college, whatever college, and just kind of hear about the day-to-day existence there. So juniors who sign up will get the chance to sort of indicate which schools they'd be interested in hearing about. We're going to try to get as many of the last year seniors back as we possibly can. So we have a wide range of schools for students to hear from and about. And then we'll put together sort of a schedule for each junior to come and go from school to school. They may use it, juniors may use it as an opportunity to look at schools they know they're interested in, hear from those kids, but it's also a great opportunity to hear about schools you may not be interested in or won't get a chance to visit or think you don't want, because to hear about it from somebody who's there may change your opinion, may change kind of what you're thinking. And again, these are kids who understand your same high school experience. So it's not so much about going to the 4 schools you most want to go to. It's more just about hearing about college from kids who are experiencing it. And it's a great night. So save the date. It's Thursday, June 9th. So it's after the freshmen in college already come home, from 7 to 8 p.m. We don't know if it's going to be virtual or in person yet, but either way, it's going to happen. And Hillary's going to tell you a little bit more.
Right. My daughter participated in college night or student-to-student college night back in the spring of 2020. So her session was virtual and it really ran off. It was great. And there were no hitches whatsoever with the virtual format. So that was terrific. She loved getting a student's perspective on college. And as Suzanne said, she had been on several tours, but you're not really getting the candid responses that you would get, if you're on an actual campus with a student guided tour. So she found it, much more, much different from that kind of experience. She also was able, because of COVID, she wasn't able to attend as many tours as she would have liked. So this was a great way to get to see schools that she couldn't attend live. And it really was a great process to kind of amp her up for, the college process. She was so excited to hear people from like a similar demographic as she was in. And, the good, the bad, the ugly, she heard, everything. And it was very candid and it was very worthwhile. So we want to encourage all of you with current freshmen in college to, when they get the questionnaires, to return them and to make sure that they can come and participate, because the more freshmen we have, college freshmen that we have participating in this process, the greater it will be for our juniors. So hopefully it will be a great event.
Thank you so much. You guys are all good?
Yeah, just
all right.
save the date and sign up.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to reiterate, probably the most important people to talk to in this process are current students, living the life that you will be living and being able to say, not just definitely what a Saturday night is like, but also what is a random Tuesday like? And so you really, and they know, you can say, I was in these classes, I'm in these classes, and they'll know what that means in terms of amount of work and how much are you studying. So this is, whether it's through this wonderful event that is being put together for you, or just kind of reaching out to your friends, cousins, older sibling, or who knows who goes there. That is the most tremendous resource. Thank you for being here tonight to kind of share that. Without further ado, I do want to get to our panelists, and I will tell you that we have asked the panelists to speak on different topics that are very general, not specific to their institutions. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask particular questions you can direct them to a particular admissions representative. But for now, and I do want to say, while this is going on, Mr. Hosier, when he sent his weekly email, and then today again, there's a link for a Google form that you can fill out with questions. We would ask that you keep the questions to more global questions that would apply to the whole, as a larger community, and not very specific questions just about your individual process. You will be able to access the same admissions representatives during your research, and so you will still have the opportunity to get those questions answered, but we're going to keep this a little bit broader for the purpose of this evening. So without further delay, I would like to introduce Brian Gomez, who's going to speak a bit from the University of Vermont, who's going to speak to you all about kind of starting this research off.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be connecting with our students and families. And as Stephanie mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about finding the right fit and how to research schools. A little preface, I'm originally from White Plains, so all of you 914 families have a very special place in my heart. And so before I get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that all of your guidance counselors and all of my admissions friends on this panel understand that there are so many different options. And finding the right fit college is so important, because where you eventually end up is going to be your home. It's a place where we all want to see you thrive and end up somewhere where you'll be happy and your parents will know that you're okay. So in the same way that you wouldn't buy a pair of shoes that aren't your size or get glasses that aren't your prescription, attending the right fit school is so important so you can make the most out of your college experience. The first things first is starting your research and making sure that you do your research. There's over 4,000 different institutions of higher education to choose from, so you will have many options. And the very first place that you should start doing your research in is with your guidance counselor. At this point, I want every student, family, parent to stop and listen to what I'm about to say next. The guidance counselors at Edgemont High School are fantastic. You have an incredible guidance department, and we all rely on your guidance counselors to relay that important information to all of you students and all of you families. So as you're navigating this process, make sure you are as visible as possible in your guidance office. And when you sit down with your guidance counselor, some things that you'll be looking for in researching schools are making sure that school has academic programs that interest you, looking at the size of that school, the location, campus culture, and housing, as these are things that will also impact your experience. It's also important to have a balanced list. This is number 2. And especially with many schools transitioning to test optional, the college landscape at so many different colleges and universities has become so much more competitive. So after you've done your research, the best way to make your list is by visiting a school's website directly and looking at their admitted student profile for their most recent class. And that way you'll be able to compare your findings and your credentials to see where you'd likely fit into that context. And after doing that preliminary research, you can start to categorize your schools into schools that you'd be reaching for and applying to, schools where you fall into those ranges of GPAs and test scores and are good target schools for you. And then schools where you're likely to be admitted based off of that preliminary information. However, with these likely schools, we'll call them, it's really important that if you don't see yourself going there, don't apply there. That's still a school where you could be happy and thriving personally and academically. And it's really important to be intentional as you're curating your list. So maybe think about having 3 or 4 different options in terms of schools and colleges for those different categories. So that way you can have leveled expectations while still going into your process with choices. Number 3, in terms of researching and finding the right fit, is to visit as many schools as you possibly can, whether this is in person or virtual. Many schools are offering virtual information sessions and tours, so take advantage of those. And don't be afraid to be adventurous and look outside of the box, whether that's looking at bigger schools or smaller schools, schools in urban, suburban, or rural environments. If you do visit in person, it's nice to also send a note to that admissions office and let us know that you visited and if you had a great experience. However, one really important note that I want to make is if you do visit schools, I strongly encourage you not to make the whole visit about the residential hall on campus. It's very easy to make this the focal point of your tour, but schools typically show off the nicest dorm on campus or have a showroom specifically for families and visitors. And I always like to say that your college experience is going to be happening outside of your dorm and outside of your residential hall. So it may be worthwhile returning to that student center, that library, maybe having lunch in that dining hall, because this is where campus is really living and breathing. 4th, while it's okay to look at rankings, I really can't emphasize enough that they change and there's no publication that uses the same formula. Some important information that you can get from rankings is information about alumni giving rates, average starting salaries, graduation and retention rates. But really keep in mind that there's not one definitive set of rankings. And this is especially crucial if a particular school may not be offering the things that are particularly important to you. 5th, if you are very interested in a particular school, show your interest early. Many colleges and universities have admissions counselors who oversee specific geographic territories. Email that office and get in contact with your particular admissions counselor. If you visit a school, again, don't be afraid to send a note to that school. If you know a school you're interested in is visiting your high school and you have college apparel from that school, not a bad idea to wear it. I know I took a mental note of students who had UVM gear whenever I visited high schools. Demonstrated interest is not only important for the school, but also for the college. And lastly, make sure to have that conversation about financials early with your family members. Oftentimes when you see that total cost of attendance, most students are not actually paying that full amount. Cost of attendance is different from net price. So don't necessarily be scared off by that high cost, because many schools have merit scholarships and financial aid available that knocks down the price of that cost. And also having these conversations can help you and your family to set reasonable expectations and go into your process feeling a lot more prepared. That's about all the 6 different points that I had prepared for tonight. And I'll finish off by saying that not only myself, but all of my 3 other colleagues who are joining us today are not only admissions counselors, but college navigators, and we are all here to support you and help you navigate in your process. Thanks so much, Stephanie, and I'll end it off here.
Thank you, Brian. You were worth the hype. You lived up to the hype. So, oh, and for Erica, jazz hands. Erica's not speaking yet, but next we have Sherry Verdon from University of Chicago to talk a little bit about the holistic approach to the admission process.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sherry Vernon. I am your admissions representative from the University of Chicago. I cover the whole New York City metro region. I have been in higher education for the past 7 years. I wrote my thesis on holistic admissions processes, so I love to talk about them at length, but I promise to keep it short for you all. One of the things that we're going to continue coming back to is the idea that a holistic admissions process truly works like a puzzle. The student is creating all of these different pieces. They're sending them to admissions officers like us, and we are putting them together to create as holistic, as comprehensive of a view as we can. One of the reasons why that's an important analogy to keep in mind is that we want you to focus on filling in the gaps. The goal here is not to stack puzzle pieces. It's not to give us the same information or the same strengths or the same experiences again and again. It's to fill in those gaps. This is part of why when admissions officers are pretty frequently asked questions like, if a student has this GPA and has taken this classes or has done these activities, are they going to get in? In a truly holistic admissions process, we can't answer those questions because all of these puzzle pieces are going to be important, and we truly need to zoom out and look at the broader picture. So let's talk a little bit about that. We're going to start with the academic side of the puzzle. Schools are looking to see whether you would be a good fit for their educational environment. While this can include grades, it can also include things like the classes you've taken. For example, does a college have required classes that they need to see on your transcript? Are they a school like a liberal arts college where they're going to want to see your excitement to learn in a variety of different subjects and not just one? We're looking to see how you've taken advantage of the opportunities around you. You are never expected to take advantage of an opportunity you weren't given. That wouldn't be fair for anyone involved, but we do hope that you're exploring and taking advantage of the ones that you are given, and you have some incredible learning opportunities at Edgemont. Trend can also be important. We all have ups and downs. We all have strengths and weaknesses. One of the beauties about a holistic admissions process is that we take that into account. So when we are looking at transcripts, generally schools are looking to see what's called an upward trend. Are your grades improving? Sometimes when we move into high school, that's a little bit of a transition period and we need time to grow. We want to see that growth, or we want to see, some high performance. Concerns can start when grades start going down across your whole high school experience. But when that happens, I want you to remember that context is still crucial. If there is a downward trend, what was the reason? Was it a one-time event in your life? Or is it a challenge to continue working on? In general, in the holistic admissions process, the more information you can share with us, the better we as admissions officers can advocate for you. And remember that that's our job. That's what we want to do. We're excited to do that. And so the more information you can provide us, the better we can put together this puzzle. Let's talk about testing for just a second. A lot of schools right now are test optional. A lot of schools either are always going to be test optional or are going to do that for the next few years or so. Those of you who have pets in your house, maybe you have small children, you might be familiar with what it's like to put together a puzzle when one or two pieces are missing. Maybe they got chewed up by the dog. You can still do it, right? You can still put together that puzzle and still get a sense of what it's trying to convey. The same goes for applications and testing. Schools handle test optional policies a little bit differently school to school, but in general, if you hand us a test score, great, it can be an important piece of context, but we don't necessarily miss it when it's not there. We can still see that academic picture. Now, we've talked about academics. Some of that is more quantitative, but one of the beautiful parts of a holistic process is that it throws emphasis on a lot of parts that can't be quantified, like activities, like recommendations. Let's start by talking about activities. When we look at a student's extracurriculars, We are not looking for a calculation of who has spent more hours involved in a club, or how many clubs someone is a part of, or whether they're spending more time at a job or as a part of their religious community rather than an organized school club. What we are looking for is to see whether students have had some experience connecting with folks and exploring the world outside the classroom, just to make sure that they would feel comfortable doing that in a brand new college environment. That's one of the great things about going off to college and starting this life, is that you're going to be expected to navigate and meet some people who are different from you. And that's what we're trying to get a sense of when we look at your activities. So please remember that this is not a numbers game. Speaking of not a numbers game, let's talk about recommendations. It is not going to be beneficial to throw as many recommendation letters at a school as you can. What is going to be beneficial is, again, to go back to that puzzle analogy and remember that you want to fill in the gaps. Letters of recommendation are an awesome way to fill in those gaps and tell us about different strengths, different experiences, different ways in which you think and learn. So think carefully about what teachers might be a great fit for this. In general, colleges really like to hear from teachers you've had more recently as opposed to ninth grade. Think about who can speak to different strengths that you have as a student. Think about the schools that you're applying to. For example, liberal arts, you might want to consider getting recommendations from a variety of subjects, just so we can hear about what you're like in maybe a humanities classroom versus a STEM environment. Also, consider asking a teacher who has seen you work really hard in a subject that you might not be as strong in. It is really tempting to go to the teacher that you're best friends with. You've aced all the assignments, that subject comes naturally to you. They can speak to that a little bit, but it might also be nice to hear from a teacher who has seen you navigate challenges, because that is absolutely going to come up in the college world. So the moral of the story is that, number one, context runs the show. Admissions officers know this. That's why we ask you for so many pieces of information. And another moral is that I want you to remind yourselves, whether we're talking about number of schools on a list, number of supplemental materials accepted, number of recommendations, lengths of essays, all of that. Remember that quality is far, far more important than quantity. There are too many factors in a holistic admissions process to give you black and white answers. Sometimes folks can get frustrated with that. Let that be freeing. This process truly lets you focus on you and makes you feel empowered to end up at a fantastic school that's a great fit for you, instead of simply orienting yourself around the numbers. We will have the opportunity to answer some questions later, but for right now, I will turn it back to Stephanie, who can pass things along.
Thank you so much. I have a different puzzle metaphor, but I love that one and I'm definitely stealing it. Brian, did you write that down? Sorry, you don't have to come off mute. Next, we have Erica Padilla from University of Rochester to talk a bit about the different, a little bit more about the different components of the application and maybe a little bit of a distinguishing yourself in a selective admission pool.
Hey folks, happy holidays. I don't know if we've said that yet, but it's hard to believe that we're already in that time of year. So as Ms. Fuentes mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit more about aspects of the application, but I really want to start with, I think one of the ones that gives more character to your application. And that's the personal statement. I, at Rochester, read over 1,000 applications a year. My one opportunity often to get to meet the students that whose applications I'm reading is really looking at that personal statement. It's the chance to lend voice to your application. And so the personal statement for me is actually one of my favorite parts of the application process, because as you were hearing from Sherry a moment ago, it's about creating all these different pieces that are actually going to be layers of who you are. So this is another chance to tell your story and introduce yourself to the admissions officer that's going to be reading your application. A couple notes on the personal statement. I think it's important to underscore that you should absolutely be yourself. You should write about the things that you know, the things that are important to you, and not so much stress out about the things that perhaps you feel an admissions officer wants to know, or perhaps things that you think are going to tick a box on that application review process that the admissions counselor is doing. We want to get to know you. So reflect on the things that are part of your daily life. Often the things that seem pretty rudimentary or everyday can actually be pretty extraordinary for us, because remember, we don't go to your school, we don't walk in your shoes. And what we're trying to understand is what that experience is really all about. So taking some time to reflect on your personal life and the things that are maybe part of your everyday can be pretty wonderful ways of starting a college essay. One of my big pet peeves with a college essay is if you are choosing to answer a question, such as the questions that are offered through the Common Application or through the Coalition application, to make sure that you are in fact answering the question. There's nothing more frustrating than trying to come across what the point that the student's trying to make with relation to this question is and never actually getting there. The other thing that often happens with a college essay is perhaps leaning on a story that might be personally a person maybe that influences your life or someone that's been significant to you, but then leaning so heavily on that you lose sight on the important part of the essay, which is you. We want to get to know you. And so always remember that whatever you're talking about, you're going to bring it back to that central person. Please check your grammar. Make sure that you edit more than spell check. And I think it's really helpful to share your essay with others and find out from others what their takeaways are from that essay. Is the takeaway actually what you were hoping they would read from that essay? Is it exactly the point that you were trying to make? Because that's typically what we're going to be actually capturing on our end as we're reading your application. The supplemental essay is actually another layer of making your application stand out. And sometimes some folks might argue that it's even more important because supplemental essays are unique to the individual institutions that you're applying to. They tend to be the most honest writing that we're seeing because frequently that supplement has not necessarily gone through the number of incarnations that a personal statement has actually gone through, which frequently has been read and rewritten by different over the course of the year. The supplemental essay can be something that a student is actually working at close to the deadline. And so I guess this is my opportunity to really underscore the importance of planning, prepping, taking this time now to start thinking about working on these essays and incorporating the time so that you're dedicating the adequate amount of time to the supplemental essays that you might need to work on. In some cases, there might be more than one supplemental essay. Why they matter? Because as I mentioned before, they're unique to that institution. And it's a wonderful opportunity for a student to be able to exemplify the reasons why they want to go to that institution. Why is that school you're going to be your dream school? And what are the things that you really, really connect with? So important to also make sure that you are rereading those and planning ahead. And in a very interesting way, the way that you answer those supplemental essay questions can be a wonderful reflection of your interest in that institution or your knowledge base about that school. Some institutions will offer students the opportunity to interview for admission. It's not something that's necessarily offered across the board at all schools, but when an interview is made available to a student, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to elevate yourself in an applicant pool. Because not everybody's going to interview for admission. You get points for showing up. One of the things that I know is really stressful with any kind of interview is the fact that you are first talking about yourself and you're putting yourself out there. It's a very vulnerable place in which to be. But the fact that you actually showed up, that you took the time to be there, even when you leave that interview thinking, goodness, I could have been so much better. I could have done so much more. You're still getting a lot of recognition for the fact that you followed through. It does give you a space in which you can actually, again, lend a voice to your application, but talk about the things that you didn't have a space to address anywhere else in your application. Sometimes it's also an opportunity to talk about things that you felt were really important to clarify or to contextualize in the application. The number one topic of conversation is you. We want to hear your personality, who you are. Don't come with a checklist of the things that you think we want to talk about, but rather be comfortable talking a little bit more about who you are and the things that are important to you, because ultimately that's going to be the underscoring theme of the entire interview. It's a great chance to support your application. In some cases, could even put you in a situation where you might be under consideration suddenly for a special scholarship award. Where an interview is being offered as optional, great chance to take advantage of it. So this is my 2 cents for taking advantage of opportunities. Optional opportunities are great ways of elevating any applicant, because again, there will be people in the process that are not necessarily going to take advantage of those. They're also a wonderful way of demonstrating interest. I hate this phrase, demonstrated interest. The idea behind demonstrated interest, I think, is a really stressful point for all students across the board, because the concern is how much is going to be enough to be able to tell an admissions officer that that institution is the place that I want to be. I'm here to let you know that it's not going to change a decision. If a student is not admissible to an institution, following up, showing that interest, being on the campus, doing the interview is not necessarily going to change that. But the opportunity for a student to step up in support of their application is wonderful. It's a great way for the student to be able to take the lead in this process. And I want to, again, reiterate, for the student to be able to take the lead in the process, because we want to be able to connect with them to understand why that institution, our institution, is where they want to be. It is the chance for the student to also demonstrate their understanding of the university and the purpose or the reasons why they're actually applying to that school. There are different ways in which a student can show that interest. Certainly attending virtual programs that universities are offering are great ways in which to do that. In the fall of senior year, and junior year, actually, we are visiting your schools, and it's an opportunity for us to come to you and for you to be able to connect with us to let us know that you are in fact interested in our institutions and ask questions. Perhaps emailing the admissions officer, that's another way in which you can demonstrate interest. But here I want to be sure to underscore how important it is to be thoughtful with those interactions. If you're reaching out to an admissions counselor because perhaps you learned that they're your admissions counselor, I absolutely encourage you to do that, but be mindful and thoughtful of the pace that admissions officers are keeping during application review season. If you're going to be reaching out, try to make sure that you're not asking questions that are easily researchable on their website or through other resources. You want to take advantage of this opportunity to really connect with the admissions officer and maybe highlight things about yourself that were not obvious anywhere else in the application. So I'm going to pause right there because there's a lot more that I can say about demonstrated interest, but I'm going to toss it back to Ms. Fuentes. Jazz hands.
Thank you so much. See, it just goes to show our silliness that we do have strong relationships with our counterparts, and it's such a pleasure to share this space with them. And I don't think I have one of the longest standing relationships I have had as a school counselor is actually with Melissa Falk. So let's let Melissa from Muhlenberg kind of round this out by talking a little bit about managing expectations, maybe parent role, students, role, and here we go. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. I think Ms. Fuentes just tipped outed me in terms of how old I might be, given how long we've actually been connected, and I've been working with students from Edgemont. Just so you know that I'm the admissions representative for Edgemont High School, and I've actually worked at Muhlenberg. This is my 29th admissions cycle. So having a long-standing connection and great affection, certainly, for the community. I'm very pleased to be here with you tonight, and so glad to be able to sort of round out the conversation as you're kicking off a very exciting process and an exciting time for families as your students are beginning the college search process. One of the things that's really interesting is this past 20 months, I think for many of us, have given us a chance to really sort of seek out and really value and acknowledge how important balance is in our lives. And that's where my recommendation comes in as we talk about really making sure that as you manage expectations in the college process and the importance of a balanced college list. All of my colleagues, I know Brian started off certainly talking about this a bit, have reinforced this idea that really making sure that for students and for families, as you think about college fit, as you think about your college list specifically, to really think about what that balance means. I know as I seek out balance, that what happens then is I optimize my progress towards my goals. And the ultimate goal in terms of this college list, right, is to have choices, to have many good fit college choices. And so keeping that in mind specifically in terms of making sure that there's a diversity of schools and on your college list, and not purely focusing on the most selectives specifically on that list. Most selectives does not equate to best fit by any stretch of the imagination. And the one other piece that I want you to keep in mind is there are 2,400 four-year baccalaureate degree awarding institutions, colleges, universities all over the country. And well over 80% of those colleges, universities admit more students than they deny. So statistically speaking, I want to reassure you as you're sort of gearing up for this exciting process and the college search, and while your eyes may initially go and focus on the colleges and universities that you've heard of as some of the most selective places certainly that are out there, to remember that there are many, many options that are good fits for students across the country. And for you individually, there'll be many good fits, and echoing everything my colleagues are saying about being thoughtful, being deliberate, and being authentic in the process. What I really want to spend a lot of my time talking about tonight, and part of this is because I am living this role right now. I'm the parent of a high school senior and have parented tens of thousands of families through the college application process in my role here at Muhlenberg. I wanted to share some of that experience with you all, very particularly in terms of what role makes sense and what role should parents and students anticipate parents should take and families should take in this college search process. First and foremost, I just want to emphasize the fact that students should absolutely be the lead in this process. And parents, and I've had this experience myself as I'm going through the process right now, should really see themselves as patient, supportive coaches. And when you think about a coach specifically, where do they stand in the big game, in the big event, or whatever competition specifically? They stand on the sideline. And so it's really important to remember that students should be steering the boat, if you will, and steering the ship and kind of leading the process in ways in which they need to take ownership, because they're the ones who ultimately are going to be attending college. One of the other pieces of advice I have for parents in terms of their role in this whole process, and I've adopted this myself, is really celebrating all the little, seemingly little, I should say, milestones of the college process. And it's not just about a student getting into college or getting into their dream college or getting into any college for that matter, but it's the milestones along the way. And I've really adopted this specifically in my own experience in terms of really celebrating that first campus tour, that first college interview, these steps towards the ultimate goals of becoming an independent college student, wherever that might leave your student specifically. And so wanted to really emphasize in that spirit to make sure that families are really celebrating the excitement, the privilege of working with your student as they're aspiring to further their education and move on to independent college life, because you've supported them up until this point and will continue to in terms of your confidence in them and certainly your belief in their ability to achieve their goals specifically. The other piece too, students to recognize your parents will have a role in this, and this is a family decision. And so really wanting to encourage students and certainly families to continue to talk to one another, and students in particular to continue to communicate with your parents about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and what you're doing in the college process. I will tell you, I've experienced this directly this year. I've had to ask, have you heard if materials have been received? Have you scheduled this appointment in terms of working with my own child through this process, my own high school senior? And so it would be helpful, and I think eliminate some of those tense sort of naggy sort of moments where I'm asking multiple questions or where families are asking multiple questions of their students. So students and parents, please commit to open communication, not only about what is transpiring and what the student is actively doing in terms of moving that college search process forward, but also in terms of the reflection piece. Parents can be great resources for students as they reflect upon what they want, what they need, and what they see for themselves, and even what they're worried about as they're moving through this process. And so that's something really important to remember, that this is really a family experience and something that should be shared and should be celebrated in so many ways. Finally, in terms of parents, in terms of all of this, coaches even need help too. And so remembering that you are not alone in this process in terms of coaching, supporting, encouraging, and believing in your students. You have an amazing professional resource in your college counseling group, and they are here for you every step of the way. And similarly, as mentioned by colleagues previously, the admissions counselors on the other side of the desk where your student is considering as their college home are similarly standing with you. And so while you are coaching and supporting and celebrating and cheering and encouraging, know that there are folks also that have your back as well on the professional side, particularly as you think about the amazing professional resources that you have in the folks in the college counseling office at Edgemont. So those are my comments for now. Happy to open the floor for other questions, but thanks for your time.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Before we go to questions, and I did want to remind students and families that there is still an opportunity that we'll be closing it shortly to put in some last questions in the Google form so that we can, Mr. Fleck will navigate a Q&A in just a minute. I would like any panelist who feels they are able to speak a little bit about any new trends or difficulties that you're navigating in relation to COVID, any different transcript trends or ability to demonstrate that interest. Sorry to use that term, Erica. Yeah, so if anybody has anything that they're able to share with the community about kind of what COVID has brought into focus for you.
I am happy to jump in here. I'm actually going to take this question in a slightly different direction. So if one of my colleagues wants to come back to those points, they're welcome to. But I want to assuage a common worry that I'm seeing, which is about folks taking gap years and deferred requests. There is a lot of worry that because of COVID, folks want to take gap years, which is going to then put a crunch on the next incoming class. So this might affect the juniors. I want to assuage that worry because each school is going to be a little bit different. Each school handles gap year requests differently. What we have found at UChicago and what most of the schools that I have been on panels with across the last year and a half have seen is that that has actually not been the case. We have not been seeing either any increase at all in the number of gap year requests, or the increase has not been drastic enough to put a crunch on the size of the next class that we're going to admit. So if that has been worrying you, I want you to take a deep breath. There is going to be plenty of room at really fantastic colleges, and that's not something that you should let concern you.
Thank you, Sherry.
I've been here real quick with I think one of the things that's been really difficult, but in some ways also refreshing, we don't have testing, right? And in some ways that does eliminate one academic element to an application. But to the conversation we were having earlier, Sherry was talking about holistic review and how important it is. I think it brings to the forefront how important it is to understand different layers of who a student is, in addition to the academic. It does create some challenges where there were transitions in just the academic programming at schools, but I want to take this opportunity to really put everybody at ease. We rely and work really closely with your school counselors to understand what those changes were. They take a lot of time and effort to educate us as to what those changes were, how it may or may not have impacted a student, a class, if something was available, that suddenly was no longer made available. So I hope this puts you at ease to know that there is a lot of work that's happening behind the scenes that you may not be familiar with or aware of, but it is happening in support of your students and your applications. So any question that any of us have, be it on this panel or any institution that you might be applying to, the first call we'll make will be to your guidance, your college office, just to understand if what I'm looking at makes sense, or is there something else that maybe I'm not seeing or missing, and they'll be sure to be the ones to walk us through it all.
Thank you. Erica, is there anyone else who wanted to speak to the specific, anything that they're seeing specific to COVID, or shall we go to the Q&A? All right. Q&A it is. We do, I know, so Mr. Fleck, I'm going to let you ask the questions, and then, perhaps you can throw it to a particular representative, or if a particular representative wants to be like, I got this one, we'll be a little bit informal and let you get it, let you jump in. I do want to, again, encourage the questions, which we'll stop taking in just a few minutes, to be as broad as possible. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks again to everybody on the panel. And Erica, you actually gave me a great segue, because one of the first questions that came in was, every high school may have some particular aspects to it that are unique. A place like Edgemont, we don't rank. We have a Phaedrus, we have an alternative school program. Or when a high school makes a change to their curriculum, we've changed science sequencing in recent years. We've transitioned from an AP English class to an honor seminar for greater teaching flexibility. So the question is, are there other pieces, and other people in the panel can jump into this? What are the best ways for that information to be conveyed? Is that something that students should feel that they have to take the onus of communicating all that information in their application themselves?
So I'm happy to jump in. It typically in Edgemont is one of the places specifically that consistently does this, but most high schools will as well provide a school profile in addition to the application. The school profile outlines all of those intricacies and details that are specific to Edgemont in terms of academic program, as well as opportunities for its students. So we can contextualize what kinds of opportunities are at Edgemont and what kinds of choices students have in terms of opting in or opting out. So changes in curriculum, that's something we're notified about through the school profile, as well as our ongoing sort of connections to the counseling staff at any particular high school. One of the reasons why colleges, universities have particular, I call them territory caretakers, is sort of how I characterize it on my team. We're your people on the admissions staff, but Edgemont is my high school, right? And so that's the onus is on the admissions counselor, certainly to be the expert on that particular experience, to understand the contextualization of reviewing that application, to understand how students are living and learning, and what changes may be impacting certainly that experience specifically. So I can assure you that Edgemont is a high school, and I've done this for a long time, that actually provides a very comprehensive, detailed school profile. And very easily, if there are any questions on our side of the desk, on the admission side, my colleagues can pipe in. We can make a phone call too if we need clarification. And we are not shy people, and we do not shy away from making those phone calls, particularly when it means we have an opportunity to advocate for students in the process.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa. One piece that was touched upon was, extracurricular involvement and activities as they appear on the application. Do colleges prefer brief descriptions of each activity? Is the name itself sufficient? What's the best way to convey what students are involved in?
Please explain it. Please explain it. And please do not use acronyms. I think it's very difficult. Also, we're at fault of it as well on the college side, where we love acronyms. Anything that gives us a little shorthand is always much appreciated. Unfortunately, we read so many applications that an acronym that could mean one thing at one school means something completely different at another. And you don't want to risk the possibility that someone is trying to make their own conclusions of what something is. Take advantage of the opportunity that's presented by giving you a space to give us a brief description of what it is. And often I tell students that somehow the language in which that you use to describe something can sometimes also speak volumes as to how important something is in your life. There's also a section in the application that's called additional information. If for whatever reason you feel that the space that's offered in either the extracurricular section of the application or even in your resume, if you're planning to send a resume, isn't enough, you can actually use the additional information section to elaborate and give us maybe more context. Again, that should still be brief though. It's not meant to be a full essay, just a space in which you can give us more clarity.
Another question that came through, can you speak about supplemental materials that colleges like to see, in particular students that are active, say in the performing arts, but not necessarily applying as a major or to a conservatory?
I'm happy to jump in here and speak about this a little bit. Really important thing to be thinking about. So I'm so glad that an audience member asked this question. Schools will treat supplemental materials differently. Some welcome them, others don't. Some will have specific stipulations. One thing, besides any requirements, one thing that I want you to encourage you to think about, maybe ask an admissions officer, is who is going to be reviewing these files. Some schools, especially if it is a conservatory type setup, and especially if we're talking something in the visual or fine arts or performing arts, they may be reviewed by faculty members or people in the program. Other times, like at UChicago, they are just going to be reviewed by admissions officers. And so they're wonderful context, but they're not going to be reviewed by folks who play the same instrument you do or do the same craft that you do. And you may want to keep that in mind when you're putting together the materials that you think can show your strengths the best. So this is going to differ school to school. It is something you're going to want to reach out to each school on your list and ask. And not just ask what their requirements are, but who is going to be reviewing them and what they are looking for.
Great, thanks, Sherry. So another question that's come in, and I feel like this has was something the panel touched upon, but many schools have become test optional. Is taking the SAT or ACT really optional for kids from districts like Edgemont, where testing sites are accessible and the school curriculum is rigorous? We had a similar question that asked, does utilizing the test option opportunity, if it's available at the college, have some sort of impact one way or the other on chances of admissions? And I open that to anyone on the panel.
Nobody wants to touch that one. I'm just kidding.
I feel we're all looking at each other trying to figure out who's going to unmute first, and we're trying to extend that courtesy. Like, I don't want to jump in again. Test optional is test optional. It is, as the phrase states, it puts the onus on the student to make the decision if they do want to or not submit testing. That's true for all districts, including Edgemont. It's a matter of how does the student want their application to be reviewed? We're not making an inference that your decision to not submit testing means that you didn't do well on the test, or that perhaps you even chose to not pursue the opportunity. The question as to whether or not it restricts access to something is also going to be, as you've heard already a few times, school specific. Every institution is going to be different. Some schools may have test optional practices that perhaps may limit access to a program, or possibly even restrict opportunities for scholarship. By and large, over all the panels that I've been doing over the last year and a half, and even before that, when I was working with schools that are test optional, that's not necessarily the case. Most schools who are test optional make everything abundantly available to students. Again, in a holistic review process, there's so many other elements and layers that are part of the review that we tend to get a lot of other information from different parts of the application regarding the student. So I hope that puts some of those pressures at ease. The other big concern that I get around test optional is comparing notes, because perhaps you hear peers at your school are opting to submit testing and suddenly you feel pressed to submit your test scores. And I want to emphasize that this is your process. Do not be led by what you're hearing from others, because maybe they've made that decision. That was the best option for them. It's important that you pursue the process from what is best for you and the choices that you think are going to be most reflective of who you are as a student. So we're not going to necessarily weigh, okay, this student did or that student didn't, coming specifically from Edgemont.
I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but anyone who has this information of the panelists, if you're able to share maybe from the last admission cycle, what percentage of your students applied with or without testing? And additionally, if you have that information for admitted students, what percentage submitted or didn't submit testing?
I would love to add on, or Erica, I'm so sorry for cutting you off. Did you want to finish off?
Go ahead, Brian. No, you got it.
Okay. Everything you said was fantastic. And I also just wanted to say that at many schools, academics will drive the conversation. And if you think that your academic credentials are better represented without test scores, maybe you don't think your test scores necessarily represent your academic credentials. If the school is saying they're test optional and you have gotten that affirmation from the school that there's no impact on or no difference in the way that applications are read with regards to if students submit scores and if students don't submit scores, then make your best judgment to show off who you want us to see who you are as a student and as a potential community member on our campus. The second thing I at least want to mention, at least for UVM, is that if you do submit test scores officially from the organization, and let's say they may be a little bit below the averages for a university, we can't unsee those scores. So it's really important, again, for you to have that conversation with your guidance counselor and with the appropriate people that ultimately make the best call for yourself. And as it relates to UVM, this past year, actually half of our students had submitted test scores and half didn't. And when the numbers shook out in terms of our admitted students, the number was actually half of our students who were admitted had submitted test scores and half didn't. So we found that there was no impact. And again, in my opinion, I think it's fantastic that so many different schools are riding the wave and really allowing students, this option to submit applications test optional. And again, on our ends and on many different ends, there was no impact, on the way applications were being read.
I'm going to go on a utopian society and throw test blind right out to the folks on this call. All right.
So I think what I was hearing on that one is when we say test optional, we're not trying to trick anyone. We mean it's really optional. Do what you feel is best. I'm getting the nods.
Does anybody else have that statistic in terms of percentage of students who had submitted test scores?
We had about just over a third of our students who came in actually test optional. So, and they were admitted into all of our programs, including our combined degree program with our School of Medicine, the direct admissions programs that give students access to graduate offerings at Rochester.
Thanks so much.
Over half of our applicants and incoming student class were test optional, but Muhlenberg, like a number of schools, has been test optional for 25 years. So one of my comments just about the test optional wave is that while it feels like it's new in the marketplace, it's actually been happening, and we're not the oldest group, so I can't take credit for that, but certainly, I think Bowdoin was the first college in the late 60s, early 70s. And they've been Bates and Bowdoin, right, since the early 70s. So I know it's new to the conversation because it's much more proliferated. And I think the last count, we were looking at 75% of the four-year baccalaureate granting institutions are test optional for this upcoming cycle. So understandable that it's new and it's kind of new territory in some places, but at the same time, optional is exactly what it means. And as Ms. Fuentes mentions, there are also some test blind admissions policies out there at some universities where in fact they will not look at any testing whatsoever. You may want to send it, but it is not part of application consideration whatsoever.
So, and I'd love to hear this next question from everyone on the panel, because I think the answer is going to vary.
We can do it in the order that they spoke before so that they
could do that.
Okay.
When a student lists a specific major or area, such as like they're applying for a Bachelor of Fine Arts program, or perhaps they're applying for engineering or whatnot, does not get accepted into that program, can the student still be considered for a different area within that college or admitted to the university itself?
Happy to start this off. And so definitely important that all schools are represented here because all of our answers will vary. On UVM's application, students and applicants select a primary program, the program that is your first choice in one of our 7 colleges. And students also select a secondary program. So that way, if you may not meet the admissions requirements for that primary choice, we can still evaluate your application and your candidacy for your second program and second choice as well.
Fantastic. Yes, this is another great question. At U Chicago, we actually only have one undergraduate college. If you hear talk of a specified program like our School of Public Policy, Engineering, etc., those are all at the graduate level. So U Chicago is a place where everyone is going to be applying to the same place. Because we are a liberal arts college and because you are going to be taking classes in a wide variety of areas, decisions are not going to be based on an intended major. You're specifying that purely so that we can match you with an advisor who might be helpful. But those are not going to affect any decision or affect your chances of being able to go into your desired program.
At Rochester, similar to Chicago, all students are going into the College of Arts, Sciences, and Engineering. So while you do identify different areas of study on your application, you're not necessarily being directly admitted into that area because you don't declare until your sophomore year. So you have a solid year and a half, 2 years to really explore. Having said that, whatever you identify on your application as an area of study does give us a little bit of a lens through which we review your application, because understandably, if you're thinking about engineering, we want to make sure that you're ready to pursue the rigor of that program, though you might change your mind. And also because we're trying to bring in a class that's diverse in background, perspectives, and academic interests. And so that plays a part of the review process to a small degree.
So similar to both Rochester and University of Chicago, Muhlenberg is a liberal arts college of arts and sciences. And so you are not admitted specifically by the majors you may indicate on your application. You are admitted to the college, and once admitted, you are free to move about the cabin, if you will, much like an airplane, and be able to sample majors and programs and classes in varied areas. The one thing I will also say, just to kind of add, I think that there are students, and there are many of you out there that are still deciding and still exploring, or otherwise undecided, as the label is used oftentimes, although we like still exploring at Muhlenberg, just for the record, because we really embrace that. That's okay too. That's okay too, because that's what college is about, particularly at places with liberal arts and sciences curriculum, where we really want you to just stretch and learn and discover things that you didn't even realize you might be interested in.
Excellent. And kind of piggybacking off of that, because we did have a couple students who had specific questions about, say, programs or opportunities to learn more about some of the specific colleges on our panel, which unfortunately we don't have time to get into each specific school's options for resources. But for a student who is interested in a particular major at one of your respective institutions, or could I come to campus and sit on a class, what types of research opportunities are available for undergraduates? And I'd love to hear from the panel about just what would be some of the best ways for them to explore and learn more about some of those specific questions that they have for your institutions. I'm going to start with Melissa, since she keeps getting the end of things.
So I think one of the best ways to connect and experience sort of those opportunities, whether it's research or just learning about sort of the academic opportunities in terms of sitting in on a class, I actually, number one, we recommend going through the admissions office, because oftentimes we have programming that that facilitates that either in person or virtually. The other suggestion I have is the current student piece. And we talked about this earlier, sort of how valuable, I know that there's a college to college program for Edgemont students coming up, how valuable that connection is in terms of making a connection to a current student and learning about their experiences, directly from a student perspective. So those are my two suggestions in terms of how to best connect with the college experience beyond the typical sort of admissions information that you might receive.
Anyone else on the panel want to have a slightly different answer they'd like to share?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. As Melissa said, the admissions office is going to be a fantastic place to go. A lot of us have programming virtual and potentially in person. If you are interested in UChicago, I encourage you to do that. But if you have a question that is specific to a department or program, please reach out to that department or program. They all have up-to-date contact information on their websites. If you're having trouble finding it, you can always reach out to us, but they are the subject matter experts. Also, Many of our colleges, including UChicago, have a way for you to contact current students. If you have a question about the student experience, what is it like to go through XYZ, or what is, what are some experiences in this certain category, you are welcome to reach out to them. Many of us have email addresses or maybe phone numbers that will send you straight to students. At UChicago, the email address is askastudent@uchicago.edu. That's another resource that I encourage you to look at across these different colleges.
Let's add one more piece, Mr. Fleck, and that's that I feel like something I wish I knew during this process, that when I was a student ambassador for my university, I tried to emphasize a lot to prospective students was you can call an admissions office and say, hi, my name is Stephanie Fuentes, and I am so excited about the University of Vermont, and I would love to speak to a student in this particular major. It might not be on the spot that you will be in contact with that student, but that admissions representative on the other end of your phone will take down your information and we'll get you in contact with the student. And within our office, there's a specific person who actually coordinates visiting programs for students interested in sitting in a class or connecting with faculty members. So just adding on to all of the other wonderful knowledge that was added by Melissa and Sherry about the different ways you can navigate accessing maybe a more personalized research experience for yourself about different universities, that phone call or maybe that kind of detailed programming some schools are offering, and at UVM, we're really lucky to offer students that personal touch their visit.
If I may offer one thing, if you take away nothing else from this program, one of the most common answers to what do schools do with this, the answer will be, it depends. And that's kind of an industry, joke, but it really does. And you should never assume what one school does, another school is going to do. And you always need to go to that school's individual website. And this is especially for students because I think they can feel like turned off, as some professors are just personally, or the institution, they're not going to respond to high school students who reach out to them. And I don't think necessarily any of these schools on the call are represented in that, but imagine there's 27,000 high schools and one person from each high school contacted a professor. That's a lot of work for a student who may not be going to their institution. So I definitely think getting the sense from the admissions office of whether that's welcome or, they'll know who often in an admissions office, there'll be a liaison to a particular department. And so I just wouldn't be discouraged if you don't necessarily get a response. And some gigantic schools really can't set up, students sitting in on classes, whereas much smaller schools often can. And so I wouldn't make assumptions about a school based on that, but always to know that you have to look at each individual school differently. One of the things when I worked in admissions that I would always tell students is admission counselors, as you can see on this call, are not scary monsters looking for reasons to deny students. In fact, they got into this work to look for reasons to admit students. So use them as your partners because they're actually they unfortunately, there are not enough beds and spaces at every institution for every qualified, wonderful applicant, but they are really looking to see you in the best possible light.
Can I add something to that? The same conversation about, so every school is unique. And I know there's also a lot of resources, there are a lot of really wonderful resources in your community. I think also, I think we've referenced this earlier, folks that want to help, a lot of people in your lives that will want to help, especially now, once you say, I'm looking at colleges and universities, I'm about to start my college application process, there will be a plethora of people wanting to offer gratuitous advice and help. And it's really important to tease out what is accurate from what might be either erroneous or perhaps dated information. The best resource will always be going to your school counselor and going to the admissions office because we will have the most accurate and up-to-date information. I think sometimes it can be overwhelming. And so relying on those resources can be helpful, but just be sure that you're always double checking and especially fact checking all the information that you're getting.
Thank you. we're winding down to the last couple questions. A couple of questions that come in that we touched on at the beginning of the Q&A. Are there things that are new or different about COVID? One question specifically referenced, should we anticipate changes because of the Omicron variant with COVID? Obviously, that's something that's very new, but for those who, as everyone on this panel has kind of lived through the admissions process in COVID and how that's changed things, when changes may be impacted because of the pandemic, how do families become informed about that when there's changes to say the programs or ways for them to connect to you, or if there are going to be changes in application process, test optional, etc. What are the best ways for families and students to learn about that and stay on top of information?
Most schools have a COVID website, like section of their website that's dedicated to COVID updates. That tends to be the go-to place for members of the community, faculty, staff, students, but can also be a really great resource for prospective students and families to know what's happening on that campus. Keeping in mind that things with COVID keep changing, and they change not just month to month, week to week, but day to day. We're also at the mercy of whatever's happening in our state, in our county, and in our city. And so sometimes, and I think it's really, really important to go into this process with some degree of understanding, patience, and flexibility, because we are adhering to a lot of those guidelines, and they can change, and very often will make sweeping changes to our practices for hosting guests on our campus, for example. So it's important to just double check if there are any restrictions or changes before, for example, you even set foot on the plane to go somewhere, to know that perhaps those visits are still available, or that there are no new restrictions that might be in place in that state or in that city. That's probably the best place, as well as, again, the admissions website. It is true, and I don't know about everybody else, we've experienced it this year. Information that I gave out this morning changed by the afternoon, because we have folks on our campus that are dedicated experts navigating the waters of everything that's happening right now. And so as they get new information, they make decisions, and will make decisions that will impact the entire campus. And then that information slowly trickles down to the admissions office. So as soon as we have the information, we make it available to students and to families, but it's important to please be patient and understanding. And thank you in advance.
I think you covered that so beautifully, Erica, and I just wanted to chime in and say that.
You're sweet, thank you.
We're having a lot of fun up here, I'm just saying. I won't speak.
We just have a couple questions left. This is for anyone on the panel or everyone on the panel, although I feel the answer will be similar. While reviewing students' applications, what do you give more premium to, or I guess what carries kind of the most weight in the application process when reviewing?
Why don't we go through?
Want to go through
in
order of speaking, Brian?
Order.
Sure. So I can at least say for our office, the academics are always going to drive the conversation. So we are always starting with that student's transcript to take a look at not just how you've been performing, in your classes, but also if your school has opportunities to maybe take those accelerated honors, rigorous classes with rigor, if you've taken those opportunities and if you've been successful in them. Because the bottom line, if you haven't been successfully performing at the high school level and the coursework that you've been assigned throughout your 4 years, it's going to be really hard for us to put credence in our decision to admit potential students to our campus and ensure that they're going to be successful students, community members, and people on our campus and our community. So I would say the transcript is really the most important piece and kind of the gateway to the rest of the application that gives us that context about all of the hard and incredible work that you've done throughout your first 3 years, that first quarter of senior year in high school.
Remember the puzzle analogy? Every single piece, every single area of the puzzle matters. We review every single one, and we cannot make a decision if any of that is missing. Academics may be a slightly larger piece of the puzzle, but truly when we are in a committee, when we're making discussions, when I'm advocating to our dean and our director, all areas of an application, all parts of a student are gonna carry pretty heavy weight in the conversation.
I echo a lot of what Sherry just mentioned, because there are sometimes a lot of layers, and as you compare notes, possibly even with peers, you're looking at even academic averages and comparing notes and trying to figure out why one student got in versus another student. And there are a lot of different layers as to why that decision was made. Different characteristics and elements that a student might be bringing to a campus community that will be incredibly important to the process. Definitely academics will be important because we want to ensure your success and that you can manage the expectations in the classroom and the rigor of the coursework. But we also have a lot of resources and supports on our campuses to make sure that you are successful. And so that's going to be one piece in the much larger puzzle.
Anybody just in a piggyback to this speak just for a moment about building a class and what comes in, because I think that oftentimes, an admit or a deny feels very, very personal, or that they don't think I can do this or whatnot, and that kind of what you're charged with in your office on the other end in terms of the constituents that professors wanting to have kids in all their classes and so on.
So I'll jump in to echo all of my colleagues' sentiments about what's most important in terms of the application review, academics and rigor and achievement, really answering the question of academic fit, because our goals as admissions counselors is that you graduate. And so there's a retention element to that. And so what evidence do we have in terms of what your demonstrated talents, both academically and personally, demonstrate that you are someone who will graduate from our institutions and thrive and succeed? Building the class, I can switch to that, is really admissions counselors are dealing in universes of thousands, tens of thousands in some cases. And so the conversation that's been referenced in terms of why did this student get in and why didn't that student get in at a particular high school or in a particular community is really talking about sort of decisions in the universe of one. And so I just want to emphasize the fact that we as admissions counselors are really dealing in a universe of thousands and really following institutional mission in terms of how is it that we are building a class one person at a time, having represented talents, perspectives, experiences that really provide a robust, comprehensive, full experience for our students as community members. And so while there isn't one particular talent or one particular sort of attribute that would stick out as a sure thing in terms of admissions decision, but rather in its aggregate, our goals as admissions officers is to make sure that the class is really aligned with what our mission is in terms of having all of those representations in terms of areas that we might have interest in. So for example, if a college might be expanding a particular academic program, students who might be interested in that particular academic program are going to be of interest. It doesn't mean that they're all getting in just because they're interested in that particular area. Similarly, if a student plays a particular instrument in the marching band and that marching band is graduating all of those instrument players in a given year, it doesn't specifically mean, for example, that those students have more of an opportunity to be admitted, but rather that talent is going to be looked at contextually as a need in a different way. And so I think one of my pieces of advice generally is that trying to anticipate what those needs or goals are at a particular institution is probably not the way to start a college process or to strategize the ways in which you present your authentic self in the application process. And so rather really make sure that front end piece, as Brian talked about, fit and match, and we're all kind of reinforcing that in our conversation, making sure that you're really paying attention to what do you need, what do you want, and where are the people, place, and programs that are going to help you achieve that.
I think it's important to focus on the things you can control in this process. To Melissa's point, it's you can control the elements of the application that you submit to us and how you present yourself to us. You have no control over perhaps what specific priorities an institution might have from year to year. This also goes back to the point that I made earlier that perhaps gratuitous information is being offered, but what was once appropriate is no longer because things change. Classes change from year to year. what an institution might be looking for will change from year to year for a lot of different reasons. And so focusing on the things that you are able to control in this process, your essay, your application, continuing to work hard this year, going into next year. Also on the point of rigor that we've kind of mentioned the importance of performance and rigor, but I think it's also important to contextualize that rigor is also about choices. Just because courses are being made available to you, it doesn't mean you should go in head first and take a sweeping number of these courses and therefore put yourself in a situation that you're not prepared to handle. We're also assessing what choices you're making within that curriculum and whether or not they're appropriate choices, because then that would create concerns for us as to how you would manage the academic program at our individual institutions and whether or not you would be able to make some of those choices on our campuses. So focusing on representing yourself. And earlier I talked a little bit about how, for example, at Rochester, you can't be necessarily admitted into a major, but what you identify on your application as an academic area of interest does in some ways play a role in the process, because it's one of those things that we use to identify diversity within the class. We don't want a class of all students from Edgemont that are all pursuing biomedical engineering or that all want to be theater majors, although that would be fantastic. So it's about balancing a class of students that's going to have a lot of diversity of background, experiences, perspectives, and contribute to the community on our campuses.
And we have just one last question. And I again want to express my sincere appreciation to the panel, but we have one question just asking, right, and we've covered a lot of great information tonight. So when's the best time to start this process?
Now.
And I'll piggyback off that and just say, and by start, what would you be advising families that they could be starting to do right now?
I just called out Brian.
She votes that you answer, Brian.
Everything that Brian said at the beginning of this conversation.
Yes. I think it's also important to know that some of us have been thinking about this since shortly after birth, and some of us, it's very new to us in this moment, and wherever you're starting is perfectly fine. Nobody is late in the process yet at all. And there's absolutely an academic institution for every single one of everybody who is on this call, everybody who's related to you. If you graduate from high school, and in many cases with at a 2-year school, you can also complete high school while starting, like everybody has access to higher education, and you have to, I always say, you do you have to be authentic and follow your process. There's no one straight line to the, golden ticket. You just have to kind of make authentic decisions in each moment and, kind of trust that those things will lead to wonderful opportunities. Thank you. A tremendous thank you to our panelists. When we weren't on camera, I was beaming at each of you as you spoke. I was kind of like, oh, we'll have to send them a check for saying that and that, and that, like, you just were, there's a reason that you're all talking to our families tonight. And I just, the messages were all really great. If I can offer one last thing, and I hope this helps both parents and students, the students might feel a little bit better about this comment. Try to limit the conversations about college to maybe it's junior year. Let's say, you may want to contract in your family that college is a conversation for Tuesday nights at 7, maybe senior year twice a week, but please try not to make it everything. It puts too much pressure. It takes away from having the experience in the moment. And this goes for students too. Go out with your friends in the evening. And the first one who says the word college has to pay or go home or something, but, really take some time to put the process away and be present, because this time does go by really fast, and it's a really great time to experience being in the moment as a high school student and connecting with these amazing peers and teachers and mentors that you have here, and your families, connecting with your families. And downtime. I don't know if anybody is familiar with downtime. It is okay to not use every waking moment of every day to do something that is possible to then put on an application in the future. Sometimes we just need that really great video, a really good Netflix show, time with a sibling, you know, petting the dog, whatever is that, you know, place for you to feel calm, you know, make time for that as well. Thank you all for making time to be here this evening or at some other time when you're listening to this as a recording. Isn't this panel amazing? I wish let's us give you a round of applause. That we don't have everyone else, but thank you so very much. For students and families who may want to reach out to the representatives here, we'll follow up with, if that's okay, with contact information, email address, you know, I guess I don't have to say be safe getting home to anybody except for my colleagues, but thank you so very much. Go relax